So, in continuing our section on the Civil War, one of the things that I wanted to start off with is actually abolitionists and those who were seeking their freedom through freedom suits. So, of course, a great example of that is Dred Scott. And then, of course, on the right, you see Harriet Beecher Stowe. So, one of the things that I'm asking you to do this week is to look at the secession documents that we have. Not all states actually wrote secession documents, but the ones that we have tell us a lot about the way in which Southern states were thinking about this issue of secession. I would like you to pay special attention to how abolitionists are depicted in some of these documents. They are important, and I think they give you a better sense of why the work that abolitionists were doing, whether it was in the context of defying slavery in the courts or writing books or pamphlets or newspapers, actually is a pretty big deal during this period. So one of the things that begins to happen in December of 1860 is that we have our first state seceding from the Union, which happened to be South Carolina. Now, just as a little bit of trivia, so that if it ever comes up, South Carolina was also the first to declare independence during the American Revolution. So just a little bit of background information there. Once South Carolina secedes, we will basically see different declarations of secession and the creation of the Confederacy, of course, by 1861. And so, as you see depicted here, there were many territories at the time that really were not under the direct control of the United States, but were claimed as such. And again, just a quick reminder, many of those were through the Louisiana Purchase as well as the Mexican-American War. And then, of course, you see free states and those that were considered to be enslaved states. And then, of course, a really important piece of this puzzle, which is 4 different states who remained slave states but decided to remain with the Union. And that's going to be important in the way in which the war develops. So there are quite a few battles. I wanted to show you this map, not because I am going to go over those battles. For those of you who are interested or familiar in military history, there's actually a plethora of wonderful books that address the different fronts of the war, as well as just the, for example, influence of technology during this period, which is pretty amazing. And I wanted to just call your attention to the fact that most of the battles will take place in southern states, and that is going to be a significant disruption both for people's lives in the South as well as their infrastructure. And that, of course, is going to lead to a very uneven distribution of wealth after the Civil War. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Since this is an American Studies class, I thought that I would introduce you to Louisa May Alcott's Hospital Sketches. Louisa May Alcott actually went to the war and participated as a nurse. This was not something unique. Quite a few women on both sides were engaging in this type of activity. At the time that Louisa May Alcott goes to the front in the fall, in December of 1862, she will be 30 years old. She will be posted at the Union Hotel Hospital in Georgetown. And unfortunately, pretty much as soon as she gets there, she actually will contract typhoid and pneumonia and is very, very sick. There was a point where they really thought that she was not going to be able to survive, but she does, and basically leaves the hospital by January of 1963. In the time that she was there, she, of course, had some experience, especially in dealing with soldiers who were being taken to the hospital. So she actually writes a series of short essays that ultimately will become what are known as the hospital sketches. She originally published them in the Boston, the Commonwealth newspaper, and ultimately they will be put together and then sold as a very short book. I included the link for the book so you can get a sense of that. Many of the later editions, especially in the 19th century, included actual illustrations to depict basically what was there. The particular sketches are not really an account of the war. They're much more about the men who were fighting the war and their lives and how their lives were disrupted. And so we can see the extension of that transcendentalist influence, of course, all the way through the Civil War, through her work. A document which, of course, becomes extremely important in the context of the war is the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Most of you are familiar with this document. I wanted to point out a couple of different things. In reading the document, and I did include a link so that you can take a look at the transcript, it basically addresses the issue of slavery, but only for the states that have seceded. If you take a close look at the proclamation, there are specific places which are excluded from the proclamation, which basically means that those slave states that sided with the Union, as well as several parishes in the South, will be excluded from having their enslaved people be free. This is really important because next week we're going to be taking a look at the issue of Reconstruction and expansion to the West, and this issue of this incomplete emancipation of enslaved people is going to be a problem. And just as a quick reminder, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation was read in January of 1863. I did want to point to this piece. The proclamation was actually published in newspapers all over the United States. And one of the things that I wanted to point to is this right here. It says, slavery, the chief cornerstone. The stone, slavery, which was rejected by the first builders, has become the chief stone of the corner in our new edifice. And so this issue of slavery, of course, is front and center in the context of the war. And the secession documents make that very clear, as well as the different events that will take place after. So the ultimate affront to the Confederacy was the re-election of Abraham Lincoln in 1864, which you see here. Keep that in mind because ultimately that is going to lead to his assassination, and but will ultimately lend victory to the Republicans for a significant period of time after the Civil War. And so this, of course, is just a reiteration of the support that Lincoln had in terms of the actions that he was taken. But also keep in mind that not everybody agreed. And so that's why you also see these little pieces of yellow that year. So in conclusion, the war, of course, ends on April 9th, 1865. You see depicted here Lee surrendering to Grant. And ultimately, the war will leave both sides with significant devastation. I did include a section on photography. This becomes one of the first wars that is well documented through that medium. For those of you who have watched the Civil War series on PBS, they primarily use pictures to tell that story. Take a look at the exhibits, take a look at some of the ways in which photography actually influences the way that people will view the war. Just as a quick reminder, photographers were primarily allowed to take pictures before different engagements and then afterwards. So, of course, it's going to tell a very particular story of the war. Anyways, I look forward to your comments and your annotations and perusal. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to let me know.